everyone. My name is Erin Meyer. I'm the Sustainable Food Programs Coordinator here at UC Merced. Today we have an awesome AMA planned with Deseret Weeks. And then Guillermo is my coworker here. We started these AMA series, Ask Me Anything, to ask experts about their field or whatever it is. And so I'm so excited to talk about food justice, food sovereignty, neo-localism, community gardens, guerrilla gardening. There's a question that came in about guerrilla gardening. So this is going to be fascinating, and the structure is kind of just ask anything, right? You can either ask it in chat or you can unmute yourself. We also have Deseret, who created somewhat of a presentation, so she can go ahead and share her slides after her introduction and everything. But let's roll it over to Guillermo real quick to introduce himself, and then we can begin.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Guillermo Ortiz. I'm the Sustainability and Diversity Educational Programs Manager with UC Merced in the Office of Sustainability. And as Erin mentioned, we started really this AMA discussion to really start more conversations and more candid conversations around different areas of sustainability. And so I'm really thankful that Deseret decided to agree to participate and share with us her wealth of knowledge and her story. So Deseret, thank you so much. And I want to turn it over to you and introduce yourself in the way that you would like.
Well, I wanted to first start off by saying thank you to, I hope I get this right. Is it Guillermo? How do
you? No, that's right, Guillermo. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, you and Erin Meyer, for organizing these talks around sustainability and food systems, because it's so important for all of us to get together and share our knowledge. That's how we build from the grassroots up. And then also I wanted to give a shout out really quick to Dr. Catherine Keski, who was actually the food systems expert that was invited to this, and she kind of passed it on to me because she didn't have time to do it, and she is my PhD advisor. And so as you know, my name is Deseret, and I'm a critical geographer, which means I'm interested in researching and finding solutions for systemic inequities of socio-environmental systems resulting from economic structures and power structures, so these broader scale processes. And so recently I've been jumping into food justice research, particularly food security, food sovereignty, and looking at that through the lens of sense of place with Catherine Keski. So I was just going to share my screen real quick and give you some basic definitions, and then we can jump off from there. So you're seeing you're seeing the right side of this, I hope. The main presentation and not the one where you see your notes, right?
That's right, Deseret.
Okay, cool. Because one day I got it wrong and nobody told me, and I was like, dang, you guys should have told me. But
oh, they left you hanging.
Yeah, they did. Anyway, looking at food systems through the lens of sense of place is really cool. And I'm just going to give 4 main dimensions or definitions of sense of place. And I do recall from my brief introduction of myself, what I am is a PhD student in the management of complex systems. So looking at these definitions from going from top to bottom, it kind of increases in complexity, and looking at socio-environmental feedback. So that's kind of neat. So one main general definition of sense of place, or 4 main dimensions, the first one being place dependence. That's basically just the opportunity that a place provides to fulfill a goal for an individual, and that individual could be a person, it could be a member of a wildlife community, it could even be a plant. So just thinking about these things in terms of food systems and also our environmental systems and sustainability. And then place identity, this gets more into environmental psychology. And so this has to do with symbolism and values that we find through being in a place. And so this is closely linked to culture or community, or also thinking about home is where the heart is. For me, earth is where my heart is, and science is where my heart is, and truth seeking is where my heart is. And so then getting into more of these ecological feedbacks, place attachment within sense of place looks at these socio-environmental behavioral relationships. So this looks at how the impacts of humans are in environmental systems and how that then how those impacts feed back to impact us, such as we were just talking about these temperatures that we're experiencing through climate change and things like that. And then so this fourth dimension of economic dependence is something that's been recently added by my PhD advisor, Catherine Keskey, and her colleagues. And this is kind of neat because it puts a new valuation or spin on our economy, which is capitalism, which is basically capital accumulation. But instead, this looks at economic dependence being the benefits or livelihoods that are attained through working the land. So we see these people on the right over here working in these rice paddies. This has been going on in China for tens of thousands of years. And then also this community garden. And then also I want to highlight the importance of the role of art in sense of place, and also that having to do with so many murals that have been made for food systems. And so I just want to define really quick the difference between food security and food sovereignty, because when we're thinking about food justice, food sovereignty is at the heart of that. So food security grew out of the time period of the 1980s and neoliberalization of the economy, or globalization of the economy. And that's when corporatism really bloomed. And because we had broad scale deregulation and corporations really got a hold of being able to do whatever they want. And so this food security definition is basically the guarantee that all people have access to food, or the ability to acquire food or nutrition. And I would like to state that there is some conflict around what are arguments around what the definition of food security is, and it gets confused between what food security and food sovereignty is. But food security basically is acknowledged as being development centered and pro neoliberalization, which is why I put these pictures of the USAID bag of rice, which is basically thinking about food security as giving a hand out and not a hand up, and top-down management instead of grassroots organizations being able to control what they desire for their food. And so that gets into food sovereignty, which kind of bloomed out of the period of the North American Free Trade Agreement, which is also during this time period of neoliberalization and globalization of the economy. And so food sovereignty is basically defined by indigenous cultures, and also the Convention on Biological Diversity, because it recognizes the importance of biological diversity. So monocrops are not good for our ecosystems. They're not good for climate change. They're not good for our soils. And they're not good for food sovereignty. So it's basically the right of people and communities to maintain and develop their own foods and respecting their cultural diversity. And so this also includes sovereignty and biodiversity protection, as I said. And so just looking at this little graphic down here on the bottom is really important, because it shows that these people on their cultural food system here are wanting to fight for their right to grow their own food and have their biodiverse food production. But then we have the military protecting this combine as it comes through here and plows through. And then we have the combine, which is spitting out the corn so that it can be made for biodiesel. So this really gets at the heart of problems. And then also over here, we see Monsanto being highlighted, and a call for to join the fight to take back our power from corporations. And so what I found through my research is that food sovereignty is a major precursor for food security, including for university students, indigenous people, migrants, low-income communities, and also minorities, among other, everybody really. And so just quickly, and then I'll be done with this, I wanted to highlight some neat things that I found through my literature review of all the different main disciplines of food security, food sovereignty, and sense of place. And what I found within geography is that many of the researchers are finding that our cultural connection to Earth is diminishing due to corporatism and globalization. And this includes fast food and processed food taking over control of our sense of place of what we have in our food systems. But what there is a silver lining around this, because as a complex socio-ecological systems scholar or PhD student, I'm learning about complex systems behavior. And that is that systems are always trying to achieve resilience. And there's some really interesting research showing that there's this movement for localism, and it's being called neolocalism. But I would like to argue that that should actually be re-neo-localism, because we were always local from the beginning, and then globalization happened and this kind of got taken away from us. So in geography and sociology and in environmental psychology, many scholars and researchers calling for us to take back our power from these corporations through, and the role of social movements being key in this. And then also I want to highlight in complex socio-ecological systems research is highlighted the organizations and institutional structures and processes are really important. And then also a lot of my research and what I'm finding to be key to take back the power from corporations is this model of management called adaptive cooperative management, which includes adapting to what socio-environmental systems need over time. So learning, but also including grassroots organizations, indigenous knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, and bringing that all together with top-down management so we can all work together as a community to address these broad-scale problems and our food sovereignty or unsovereignty or insovereignty. And so I just want to end and open it up by saying, how can we neo-localize and some of my ideas and what I've been active in my whole life, and I believe is really important, are community gardens and also community supported agriculture. And I just want to ask you all and open it up to questions. Do you have any other ideas? I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I think I did stop sharing. Did I?
Still sharing.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I don't know how to end it.
So
it might be good to leave it up, Deseret, so it can spark
Okay.
conversation. And because I'm still reading and processing. It's
Okay,
good.
cool.
It's great stuff.
I think maybe in addition to like community gardens and CSA, I like the idea of like mutual aid opportunities around food sharing. You know, sharing your garden surplus with your neighbor, or like our People's Fridge, which is a community fridge where people can leave donations, whether it's from their garden or they bought too much at the store, and they give it, they donate it to the fridge, and then people can access that fridge for free produce. And so I think that is a good form of this neo-localism in some ways that addresses food insecurity and food insovereignty at the same time, and food waste too, which is a huge problem.
I agree. I've gotten a lot of food at food banks over my life, so I absolutely agree with you.
Deseret, I do have a question. One of my background and prior to coming to UC Merced is in federal policy making, and in that space, policy issues are often seen in very siloed instances. Like you have your people who work on the environment, people who work sadly on the oceans, right? And they do, these are the econ folks, these are the housing folks. And what I saw from your presentation was a big focus on intersectionality of disciplines and to understand complex systems. So how do you go about, when you are examining these systems, like peeling back the layers that are very intertwined to understand them, and then you know, discover more within your research? And are there lessons that can be taken over to, like in a policy sense, to stop looking at these things as if they're separate issues, or if they're suddenly not connected with one another?
Well, I guess three things come to mind. The importance of the intersection of policy with science, but also grassroots organizations and indigenous knowledge. And that's why I highlighted adaptive cooperative management, which is also known as ecological management. And that was kind of highlighted at first with Eleanor Ostrom's research, was showing that people can actually work together and manage environmental systems sustainably. It's not necessarily always going to be a tragedy of the commons. We can work together. We just have to include everybody. So that's one aspect of it. But also as an academic, I think it's really important, and there's a big movement now for interdisciplinarity, and for different types of people from all different disciplines to come together to share knowledge. And that's another part of adaptive cooperative management, is it includes learning over time and sharing different types of knowledge. And really highlighted here, what needs to happen is indigenous knowledge and traditional ecological knowledge, because indigenous people, if we look at this place attachment, as I said, it grows over time. Indigenous people have extremely important information to provide us, because they have stories to tell from long ago, and they have ideas and understandings of ecosystems that we don't have. And as we have become separated from the ecosystems within which we live through our economic system of capitalism and corporatism, we need to gather that indigenous knowledge again. And I would like to highlight that we all have indigenous roots. It's just some of us are much further away from our indigenous roots, because we've all moved from our homelands and we've all taken part in this economic system, and we've all gotten used to eating fast food. So I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but I guess there's those two. But if anybody else has any ideas, please do chime in.
Hi. This is just so great, because I think that it looks at, the grassroots movement to kind of take back possession of our means of production as far as like food goes. But I'm also, because I'm a sociologist and I'm working at the global level, and we think about how neoliberal capitalism in particular creates and legitimizes kind of this industrial mode of production for our food. So I'm wondering, like, can we talk about the possibilities if we have this systemic that's happening at the global that's producing industrialized and processed food sources that's then embedded into our governmental systems like the USDA, et cetera, that then are working across national landscapes. And then we have this grassroots movement that's kind of pushing back on it. I'm just wondering, how do we get a better balance between these two forces? It's a difficult question, but I mean, as long as I don't know, I'm just saying that on one level, we have people, I want to create local spaces. Like I walk around my neighborhood and there's like a little food bank and people can pick up food. Well, that's people kind of redoing distribution. But when we move into production and we see that these forces are all industrialized monocrop production forces, there's got to be some way interdisciplinarily to kind of pull this together so that we can change it at the structural, which I don't understand completely how we can do it.
Well, I guess one thing that comes to my mind was the literature review I did on this stuff, food security, food sovereignty, and sense of place. Was in sociology, what was highlighted was the role of habits or habitus. And I think I discussed that with you, Nefertiri, but anyway, thinking locally, thinking globally, acting locally, like that's so powerful. And supporting local agriculture, supporting organic agriculture. When you go into the grocery store, buy what you can, support what you can that's local, and try and take control of the system ourselves at the local scale. But as I said before, I think that adaptive cooperative management is one of the best models to try and adapt this, because, or to implement what we're trying to do here. And the U.S. Forest Service, this is kind of a positive note, as science is being brought into our federal organizations, we're realizing more that interdisciplinarity, grassroots organizations, and to make things work, we have to include local voices and local people to make management models actually work. So if anybody else has any insights, please, let's hear it. Maybe we're ready for the next question. But what do you think, Nefertiri? I mean, surely you have an answer to that.
I don't. I mean, that's why I'm asking that question, is because I work with a theorist who his name is Karl Polanyi, and he essentially was looking at the period of time in the 1900s when kind of liberalized capitalism as a market system was getting off of the ground. And he was looking at how like the commodification of our landscapes was directly damaging the people in different geographic spaces, and how this was kind of working across our unequal national divide that emerged out of colonial conquest. And his theory is really interesting because he's looking at how, okay, so we have these one powerful logics where we want to commodify and we want to turn everything over to the market system, meaning our foods, our landscapes, even our people, right? When we bring them into labor, they become commodified. But then he says, like, there's so many damages that take place, like this double movement occurs where people organize from the grassroots and they say, you're destroying our lands, you're killing our people, cancer rates are raising because of this, right? And so when you think about, for instance, what's happening with monoculture throughout Iowa and throughout the United States in the Midwest, where you have an incredible amount of farmers' wives who are dead, right, from the chemicals that they're putting on. I mean, this one community, I mean, you can look into this, like every single farmer's wife was dead because women are more susceptible to pesticide damage because of the fats and stuff that women hold in their bodies. So you have this, you know, this organizing from the ground up to make changes. But I'm at an impasse of like, how is it that we can cause the double movement, right? The grassroots organizing from the bottom to actually transform the structural reality that we're dealing with that has been institutionally created for hundreds of years now. And so it really is ensconced and embedded in at a systemic level. And I think that working across disciplines is it, but it's also, I mean, something has to happen at the top down to delegitimate the chemicals, the monoculture, the, you know, the destruction of landscapes for raw material acquisition. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but for me, I'm having a disconnect understanding like, how can we support these grassroots movements that are coming up from the bottom to kind of stop the damages by making changes at the structural level to actually empower those people, which I'm finding that the social struggle between the two groups is just too difficult to navigate.
Well, I think you've really touched on a nerve point here with the United States government and how it really does serve the interests of corporations over the people when it boils down to it, and how law, really when it boils down to it, often serves the interests of corporations over people, and through the deregulation of pesticides, especially what happened under Trump, all of the deregulation that happened for pesticides and things like that. So, gosh, I guess voting.
Yeah, so we have on, yeah.
Voting is.
I mean, on one level, we're trying to uphold growth. We've got to keep our GDP high. And so therefore, we've got to deregulate and maintain growth imperatives. But at the same time, like that growth imperative from the base is like destroying us. So I'm just trying to figure out how can we actually change the logics of the at the systemic level itself. And I know degrowth and some of these other things are a way forward. And I don't want to be the Debbie Downer, but it's.
Well, no, I don't think you're being a Debbie Downer. I think you raised some really interesting and eloquent points, and we're seeing that not only in food production, we're seeing that in energy, right? This move away from centralized power plants to things like microgrids or more renewable energy or more localized control over energy production. You're seeing that in a variety of industries and in a variety of spaces, that there are these, I think, push and pull factors. Like there's, you know, to mention what I would think is like the modern day alcohol industry, and how all of a sudden there's not all of a sudden, but there's then the, you know, you get these huge corporations kind of monopolizing this space, and then all of a sudden there's this push on the local factor of microbreweries and understanding historical ways of alcohol or food production and how that is constantly at odds. So we are in a lot of different ways seeing this like kind of tension that arises from large centralized entities when human beings are social beings, and we are tied to local communities that's how we organize ourselves, even though we have such an elaborate system when we go all the way up to the global scale. And I think you rightly point out that it puts us at odds with our very nature at times. At least that's my interpretation of, and what I've been seeing, at least and what makes it so difficult to tackle things on in terms of the climate crisis, is that you do have these huge processes that are counterintuitive to our natural way of being in some ways, and our structures and political institutions aren't necessarily able to adapt quickly to what is really a vastly changing world. That's feels like it's hard, it's a struggle to keep up with everything that is happening and changing.
That really, like, it reminded me of the main theory that undergirds the adaptive cooperative management is this thing known as panarchy theory, and it looks at this figure 8 cycle of complex socio-ecological systems where we exploit, and then we go into like this thing where we're like accumulating our exploitation of what we're getting from that exploitation, and then the system goes into a crisis, and then we have the opportunity to come together and organize and come out of that crisis as a more resilient system. And just to put a more positive note on this, I do believe that that we, as you were saying, we are trying to get back to our roots. We're trying to gain these knowledges that we used to have. But the question is can we do it in time? Because in complex systems, we know that there is a pause in time as we're learning. Like the system has to catch up with itself, so it takes time for us to learn from our mistakes, and then there's other problems happening during that process. So it's very complicated.
I think there's just a lot of, and we're seeing it in manifest in different ways around the world in different subjects, but we're seeing everything from take the destruction of the Amazon and the struggle for food and food sovereignty that's occurring in South America to energy struggles that we're seeing across the world. We're seeing environmental pollutants, all of that culminating in what we're seeing is kind of these tension points as we try to adapt and figure out, we have I think a fundamental understanding that these patterns are not sustainable over time. And so people are trying to ring the alarm in different ways in different industries. And I think that also manifests in some of the social tensions and interactions that we're seeing on top of the environmental ones that we see out in the world. So I think these discussions are helpful to understand, like, one, that these aren't isolated. I feel like that's one of the things I've always struggled, is seeing how these things connect to one another. How can we help people identify connections and then I guess speak to one another, right, as human beings, to figure it out.
Absolutely. So who's got a question?
I do, or if I may, kind of pivot the focus to UC Merced if we're interested.
We are.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess I don't really quite have a question. Well, maybe there is a question, but sort of also opening it to the floodgates, or lack thereof, because there's no water. But just sort of where are we as a university in this framework for food sovereignty, from our students and the UC Merced population? I know at some point the university mentioned how one of their goals was to promote sort of more direct, I guess, for lack of a better term, kind of supply chain avenues towards the Central Valley farmers and things like that. So trying to open that, but I don't know where they are in that progress. And just thinking about some things I've heard from students, because I've been remote. I just got to Merced last month, and just picking up things like some people have mentioned the food is like offensive to them, what they're eating. and there's not a lot of options. It's also expensive, like for the dining hall option. So it's like all these things are kind of, UC Merced can be its own little system that we can think of. And what are the connecting points with the community and what's available to us in this context, and also, what are our partnerships like with Aramark? How do we stand with that, and how are we trying to move forward with this framework, working with a corporation like Aramark?
Well, other people have things to chime in on this. I'm sure Aaron knows some things, and Guillermo. I think I'm saying that a little bit wrong. I hope I get it right soon.
No, you got it. It's Guillermo, but you got it.
I actually am right now inputting data from about 750 surveys done of food security, food sovereignty, and sense of place among UC Merced students. So you've asked the right question, and I can back you up that many of the students, like there's a section at the very end of the survey where they're asked if there was anything left off of this survey, if there was anything they wanted to say. And many of the students are saying that exactly what you have just reported to me, that there aren't really any healthy food options on campus. And I know that the school is trying to provide what are supposed to be healthy options, but those partnerships broadly, especially in the cafeteria, are with restaurants that have a lot of sugar in the food. And some people are gluten intolerant, which I think is also related to pesticides and toxicity of our environment, quite frankly, because of the pesticides that are put on wheat, which I actually learned at UCLA. So I'm not just saying that out of nowhere. Anyway, one thing that I've noticed at the many universities that I've been at is, and UC Merced as well, I think is taking part in this, is that they are under contract with Pepsi Cola. And this is something that needs to stop like as soon as possible, if not immediately, because Pepsi is bad for the planet. It's bad for people. It's bad for water supplies. It creates plastic pollution. And it's not right. And my sister Nefertiri, even she told me at one point, I think it was Pepsi that was, they were requiring that there were less water fountains so that people would actually have to buy Pepsi products. So it was like controlling people's ability to drink water so that they would have to buy their products. So this is like a serious situation. And I don't know who that other corporation is that you're talking about, but I would love to learn about it.
Yeah, I'll post in the chat. Their Aramark, they are like food and uniform company. They contract with prisons, universities, and et cetera. I'm not clear if UC Merced is still in partnership with them. I think they are. But it's also, I guess also to all these points is like the visibility of all these things. How visible, it doesn't seem easy to me just looking around through websites where we're at with any of these things, that they're, goals that they're talking about. I think the last update was like 2017. So it's like, okay, it's 4 years from now. So, that's also another issue with, communication from the university. It's like you say you have these goals, but you're not, and these things take time. Like you said, there's always the catching up point when we get data and we assess it and we report back. But I think having that kind of transparency and visibility is also part of what helps make the progress happen faster. And yeah, I just don't know the efforts on the university's level, how much they're really putting forth, trying to make this a reality.
Let me add just real quick that also in the survey, the students were emphasizing that they went to food trucks. And this is part of this neo-localism and the importance of supporting local businesses. And so a lot of the students did like food trucks. And since this is being recorded, I think that needs to be emphasized, that we should provide the ability of more food trucks to be on campus. And so Guillermo, go ahead and say whatever you were going to say.
Yeah, I was absolutely going to kind of respond to and help out, kind of identify some of the things, Anna, that you're interested in learning about, at least with some of the, like what kind of partnerships are we forming with the community. I would say a lot of the work that at least the Office of Sustainability is doing has been led wonderfully by Erin and the programs that she has been developing And Aaron, if you want to take the opportunity to kind of highlight some of the programs that you're working on, and then I can kind of, after that, kind of go into that relationship with the dining department and what the university is looking, and how the Office of Sustainability is trying to, work across departments and see what we can do on that front. But Aaron, if you want to, if you have some points, I think there's a couple of programs I know that would be helpful to kind of get some understanding on here.
Yeah, so I don't deal a lot with dining and the pavilion and so on. I wish I could. For one, it's a bandwidth issue, but also just logistical stuff. So my focus is on like food recovery programs, food waste programs. So one thing I coordinate is Food Connect, which is a Facebook and Twitter site. It used to be Crop Mobster, which was like the Craigslist of food, nutrition, and ag, where anyone in the community could post things related to those topics. So like if you had a gardening hose, you could post that for sale or for free or whatever it is. And that had to close due to a lack of funding, but we transitioned those social media sites over to Food Connect 2020 because we recognized that it was a valuable way to spread the word about some of the other programs that we had. I also coordinate the Bobcat Eats Food Waste Awareness and Prevention Program. And this initially started as a partnership with the Merced County Food Bank to help them save food, because even though we are in the business of reducing food waste and hunger, they were still wasting food, which just kind of indicates to me and to us that there's food waste happening all along the supply chain, even in food banks. So we worked with them to set up new distribution sites in the area and quickly reduce their food waste from about 15 to 3%. But as we were setting these up and everything, we got word from some folks that were seeing food waste in a variety of places. I won't name them, but then we worked with those places to set up food rescues. So we now are like a food rescue operation, which wasn't necessarily the original intent, but that's how it now, that's how the program has evolved. And so under that program, with the success of it, we also started a few things, especially with COVID. So actually, let me back up. One other program prior to COVID was No Food Left Behind, which is a text messaging service that was initially created to connect students, staff, and faculty with events that might have surplus food left over. One thing that many of you may be able to attest to is that at catering events, or really just events in general, there was often food left over, because event planners tend to over order because they'd rather waste food than run out for their guests. So we set up this text service where students would get like a text 24 hours before the event, and they would have 15 minutes after that event to go collect free food. So that was a way to reduce food waste and food insecurity at UC Merced specifically. With COVID, we had to pivot that program because there were no events, of course. And so now we're using it more as a way to connect students, staff, and faculty with other food events, like off campus at the food banks. We tell them about CalFresh, things like that. And once university, opens up a little bit more, we're looking at how we restart that safely. But then with the pandemic, we launched a couple of new programs, one of which is the Pop-Up People's Pantry, which is a free pantry that happens every Saturday from 1 to 2:30 at the local community garden out here. And then that has grown substantially, basically, and it continues to be successful. As we were working on that last year, I pitched this idea of a community fridge as something I've wanted to do for a long time out here. But then we realized that time is of the essence, so let's do it now with COVID. So we opened up a plant-based community fridge at the same location where the pantry is. So this is a form of mutual aid. Anyone could donate. Anyone could take food. We don't ask any questions about income or anything. That's what we try to do for pretty much all of our programs, because I recognize the potential stigma around asking those kind of questions. So it's free for everyone. And we're also doing that to work towards food sovereignty and just building community. So we launched that, and then there's some other like small programs which I'll just briefly mention. We have a contactless food box delivery system because we also recognize that one of the issues with food insecurity is that, or it's transportation. So people don't have a means to get to the store, the food bank, or food pantries. So we have set up a program where we take 10 boxes to folks in Merced every Monday. And then one super exciting thing, which I'm happy to chit chat about just real quick. We are now working with Fresh Food Connect, which is actually a nationwide organization based out of Denver. And they partner with operators such as us. So UC Merced is the operator. And the app, basically you download it for free at the App Store. And then you, if you're a gardener, and then you say you have surplus produce and you donate it to the People's Fridge. So that is also another form of mutual aid and food sharing. So a lot of these programs are what I first talked about was food sharing with each other as a way to neo-localize our food system. And we try and opt for healthy food. And so I think that's one thing that UC Merced students could really take back, that like our fridge is plant-based, which is a point of pride for me. So you won't see those like sugary drinks in there or anything. So I don't know if that helps kind of address some points, but that's kind of a synopsis of some of the programs that I coordinate.
And to follow up on that, Anna, we do, as an office, coordinate with our dining department, which covers a lot of the cafeterias and things that you identified as well. And we're actively pushing for more sustainable procurement. But as a general point, I would say on the things of, contract renewals and everything with these larger corporations, I think rightfully so, we should be organizing students, faculty, staff, and honestly the local Merced community to push for more sustainable options, healthier options to be served on campus and to get sourced from the local community. I think within that role, I know obviously this session is being recorded, so this is just another point that we're hearing from the community, that there needs to be more to be done, that we need to think critically about the supply chains that we're interacting with, especially with not only here at Merced, but also within the UC system, and start thinking about, I know there's working groups and all that in which we talk to our colleagues at different universities, but thinking critically, hearing about the research from folks that are being done on our campuses and pushing us in a much better holistic and sustainable direction is where we need to go. So within those efforts, we definitely hear you and would like to amplify those voices in this venue, but also in any others that we have, that this is important.
Well, I'd like to put in here what I would like to see happen. I think that the UC Merced should have a community-supported agricultural farm for its school, and that low-income students should get that food for a reduced or free price, especially if they're willing to work on the farm, or people could work on the farm to trade for food, trade their work for some food. But I did want to highlight that in that survey that I'm inputting all this data for, a lot of the students that are not from the United States, or that are children of migrant families and things like that, they don't really have access to their cultural food, and they are amplifying that. And so I'd just like to say that with a CSA, or also if we could increase the size of the community garden on campus, which I still have no idea where it is. And I don't know if regular people can just access it, but it needs to be much bigger. So that people actually have control over the food that they're growing. We can share knowledge. We can learn from each other's cultures and build our cultural basis with the earth, with our production of our food. And just thinking about how we couldn't get food and we couldn't get resources when the pandemic first started. The grocery store shelves were empty. And then people kind of got, the people who are living on campus kind of got trapped in that situation with not being able to get food. If there was a community garden or a community supported agricultural farm we would have access to fresh food and have those cultural elements put into those farms. So I think that that would be really important to address food sovereignty, because as it is right now, it's like Nefertiri was saying, it's still those top-down systemic structures that are providing that food for us. And while what Aaron was saying is that it's plant-based, and I'm really proud of that too. And thank you so much for all that work. That's really important. We need to start building from the grassroots up too.
I think it's a wonderful suggestion, and I think goes to show that when we think about even the UC system as a whole, to think, what does food sovereignty within the system really look like, and how can we encourage it? I think suggestions like yours, Deseret, that you just pointed out, are key answers to that, and to think creatively, and most importantly, engage the community to make sure that we're hearing these solutions that are being offered in our own backyards, right?
And Merced just got so much money from that author, and also from the state, and some of it was supposed to be for agricultural research and development. So just saying, I'm willing to do some work. If anybody wants to work with me, I'd be happy to work on that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Deseret, Guillermo, and Aaron for detailing all of that. I've heard of some of those things going on, so it's great to hear that, you know, throughout the pandemic, you were all pushing for a lot of change and adaptability really quickly, which, you know, will build that resilience that we're all speaking to. And Deseret, I am very interested in in working on some of these things within the context of university. One thing that I've heard just from students and even people in the community that I've gotten to interact with is people, they need help, and there aren't clear, we're kind of gatekeepers in the academic community, is, even if some of us to different extents, I'll put it that way. And, you know, the more that we all are aware of all of the options available, the more we can connect with other people and pass on this information, because knowledge is empowerment. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to more conversations like this in the future and working together. So thank you.
I will send you an email. Thank you.
I'd like to add something, if it's okay. What Guillermo was saying about this tension, and it's constantly on my mind as far as you know, moving through the slow process of change, of trying to bring everything local and getting the word out and changing behaviors, consumer behaviors, and using that voice through the pocketbook to the corporations, that we're not going to buy that anymore. We're not going to contract with Pepsi anymore. We're going to go to what we believe in. And, you know, and then the tension of, oh crap, we're running out of time. So what are we doing to save our seeds, right? I hear climate change is affecting what is it, Norway or the Arctic Circle? The ice is melting. That's where we have our world seed storage. So that freaks me out. How can we start doing that in the local communities of saving heirloom seeds and these culturally connected foods, you know, seeds of these foods and fruits and things like that. And what else can we do now? So, and I love the fact that Nefertiri, you're a sociologist, Deseret, you're working complex systems. So when I think of those two things together, is like, okay, to me, sociology is like, you know, human behaviors and as a group, right? As we work in a group, societies and civilizations, and it creates this complex system. And I don't want to like overstate the obvious or be pedantic here, but I think we may be overlooking something very important, and that's the education piece. And because we're at a university, if we can, I'm pushing the School of Natural Sciences, who I work for, to have this interdisciplinary sustainability major that involves sociology and sustainability science and complex adaptive systems. So we can start looking at, and then that knowledge, as Anna had mentioned, it starts getting diffused into the community. Work is already being built on the shoulders of Aaron with the food awareness aspect. And then the community can start buying into that, and what the university is doing, Guillermo, what you say, like partnering with Merced College on their agricultural majors and their systems there. The local politicians, that we need to have a buy local campaign for Merced so we can start pushing the economy. So people are knowledgeable and educated about the power of their purchasing and saying, no, we're not going to take this, we're not going to do that, but we need to move on this pretty quick. So education, I think, is the best place for that, because we can influence politicians. We can use remarkable amounts of funding to start bringing more programming out there, getting more students in majors that can start impacting these types of things, and building the relationships with the indigenous communities, with the agricultural communities, with the migrant farm community, everything in the Central Valley. And let's build it in the heart of California first, and then we can do that. But with that concept in mind of, yeah, we also need to look at the worst case scenarios, and let's start saving our biodiversity. There was a book by E.O. Wilson, Harvard biodiversity specialist, and he wrote a book called Consilience. I'm not going to say that I read it, I have it, but I think I started it. And it's talking about these interdisciplinary fields and bringing in with science to start getting all the players at the table to start speaking and looking at solutions. So no real question, Deseret. I just want to say thank you, as well as to Aaron and Guillermo, for offering these awesome Ask Me Anything things. I loved your presentation too, so I'm looking forward to more later.
Thank you, John. The point about seed collecting is so important, and then that gets back to this food sovereignty and the importance of us working with indigenous communities. And look where we live in California. How many different tribes do we have? How much knowledge do we have to gain? I absolutely agree with you. And if you want to network with me, I don't have a dissertation project yet. I'm willing to put something together and create an adaptive cooperative management project that has to do with bringing everybody together, start this act locally or be local, Merced, whatever you're talking about. And I know other people who are in my department, and surely there's more in environmental systems where we can network and get more people on board with this. And I absolutely agree that UC Merced needs an interdisciplinary sustainability Ph.D., which is what the complex systems management Ph.D. is supposed to be, but it's really focused more on management of sustainable business. And I think it needs more environmental systems. And I would like to see the complex systems program and the environmental systems program come together, honestly.
I mean, I think you raised some really great points. I think I love it, and right, I think in the age of social media, right, yet we're constantly hearing how much we need to be more social and be with one another. And I think that goes to show, right, in a world where we kind of corporatize being social, that now there's this localized movement of getting back together. But I think one of the most important things I've come to realize in my work around climate change is that, as we can see from what's going on around the world, it's very much on our doorstep happening. And if we do not work with one another and educate ourselves and collaborate and really lean on the richness and vibrancy and the diversity that exists within all communities, we're going to be up for an uphill battle. It's going to be very difficult. And I think these interactions and these conversations allow us to reconnect, reestablish ourselves in ways that I think, especially in this year and in the pandemic, has really taught us how significant it is for us to rely on one another. So Deseret, thank you. And I thank you for the knowledge that you shared today and your willingness to work with really folks who are on the call. And I encourage the folks who attended and or who are going to watch this later to reach out and find new, interesting ways to collaborate and build something amazing with one another.
We didn't ever get to talk about the gorilla farming, and I just want to say that's really cool. And a friend of mine was like, oh, you should bring up how you can graft different fruits on trees. And then you can just start growing fruit on trees around town, and then people can have fruit and stuff like that. And then in many urban areas, people are utilizing that small strip of what's supposed to be yard in between their sidewalk and the road or whatever, where there's some grass right there, and instead they're growing food and herbs and stuff, medicinal herbs. So I think that those are important parts of this neo-localism. We're getting back to our roots and things like that too. So sorry we didn't get to touch on that.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to actually bring that up. And then maybe one good way to end this, there was a question that came in and it says, how can one take action from their local community? I know that we've said a lot of things, but if you had like one top action.
You mean in their local community?
Yeah, I just read it specifically from the question. It said, how can one take action, parentheses, health of the ecosystem from their local community? I'll also put it in chat if that helps you.
The number one thing that comes to my mind is to support organic agriculture, because when we do that, or biodynamic agriculture that's grown locally, that way we're addressing climate change, we're increasing soil, the ability of soil to sequester carbon, we're addressing biodiversity support, because pesticides destroy soil, and so do these big combines that are used, those destroy the soil quality. And then organic agriculture also increases the ability of the soil to retain water. So that's really important, especially in California, when we see that our snowpack is diminishing over time. And I don't know if many of you know, but snowpack in the Sierras actually provides 80% of the water for our agricultural and urban areas. So that snowpack and climate change, it's really important for us, and the farmers are feeling the impact of it, and they're blaming it on policy. So in my opinion, supporting organic agriculture and even community supported agriculture is number one, but also social movements, social movements, social movements.
Great answer. All right, so I don't want to take up too much of everyone else's time. I want to make sure that we end on time. Once again, thank you so much, Deseret, for being here. This was fascinating. I feel like we could go on and on and on. I say that for all these AMAs, but it's true, especially for this one. So if anyone has any additional questions or anything, feel free to send an email. After this has been recorded, so I'm going to go ahead and post it to YouTube and then send out an email afterwards. It has the link as well as any other pertinent resources. And I look forward to the next AMA, and stay in touch. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.